Listen to every word I'm about to say. This might be the most important message you hear. The previous 5 parts of this Create Your Own Conspiracy series set the stage for this warning. I've taken the liberty of filling in the remaining gaps with the 2-part episode, The Devolution of the Southern Democrat, where I laid out the deliberate effort to manipulate the working class of America against one another, to profit off of patriotism, exploiting those values into a froth of rabid nationalism that bred the rising fascism we see so apparent today. This is everything we've talked about up to now, and then some. We're talking about the NRA, American Legislative Exchange Council, and more. But this is more about America's surrender to division, bigotry, and prideful ignorance, attacking one another from within, leaving us vulnerable to an attack from the outside. We were deliberately dumbed down and numbed down over decades in an effort to control us, to subjugate us under the oppressive boot of capitalism, without the foresight to see that those tactics could blow up in America's faces. Our emotional and academic intelligence, our compassion, empathy, and ethics, all under assault. Technology expanded that exponentially, and we, the people, weren't prepared for it. A chink in the armor, a crack in the glass. It was all they needed. The internet was in every home, soon to be in every pocket. You've heard this before, right? Maybe we need to hear it again. They couldn't eradicate our economy. They couldn't outmight our military. They couldn't realign our allies. They couldn't disrupt our democracy. Until they figured out they could compromise our ways of life. They could infiltrate America. They could destroy us after all. This time, they didn't need spies, though they still used them. This time, all they needed was us, divided. This time, you see, we were the spies, each and every one of us, double agents for the enemy. We let this happen. We let this happen right in front of us. We were even told this was happening while it was happening. But we wouldn't listen. We weren't smart enough to realize it. We didn't care enough to. This is your final warning, America. Your complacency will cost you. You may wish to live in the peace of oblivion, but that's like a warm toilet seat in a gas station bathroom in the dead of December. It feels really nice, but when you ask yourself why it feels so nice, you can't stop thinking about why it feels so nice. And when that nice feeling stops, all you're left with is knowing you sat on somebody else's ass print. That peaceful oblivion is temporary, and the sands are running through the glass. Time is running out, America. Tick-tock. Listen to what I'm saying. And welcome to the podcast. The first step of this has been much of what I've discussed all season. The Democrats have the ideas, but no killer instinct, leadership, or vision for making those ideas happen. The Republicans have no ideas, but plenty of killer instinct, leadership, albeit corrupt, and for their vision of the future, they've turned to fascists and the church. Through the election debacles of the mid-20th century, the fight for power, and the parties eating themselves alive, we've got one man rising from the Nixonian ashes to lead America into a new world order of ethical ambiguity: Ronald Reagan. The work of special interest lobbying groups like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and the NRA, for prime example, as well as others, as well as Newt Gingrich's own Conservative Opportunity Society, played the easily manipulatable and influenceable Reagan to push forth the conservative agenda that's running today, one that seems to be pushing for Article 5 of the Constitution. He shouldn't be absolved from responsibility. He wanted it. But remember, the man had been brainwashed out of his working class values and into a pro-corporate corruption stance for a quarter century at least by the time he was president. After Nixon's loss in '60, the Goldwater loss in 1964, and then Nixon's victory among a contentious field in 1968, pieces began moving into place for what would eventually be the dumbing down and numbing down of America. As the '60s flipped the calendar to the 1970s, Reagan's political prominence was growing, and his destiny was coming to fruition. Meanwhile, an Australian newspaper mogul was gobbling up tabloids and newspapers down under, and by 1974 relocating to New York City to stake his claim on America's media. At the same time, the son of the biggest promoter in sports entertainment would come to work for his father's wrestling promotion, the one he would buy 13 years later. And, simultaneously, the multimillionaire son of a real estate developer was rising to prominence in his father's company, and by 1971 would be named president of his father's company. I'm not the first to link the latter two. They have a long-standing history. Some have blamed Vince McMahon for creating the Donald Trump persona we know today by filtering that sociopathic narcissism through the warped character kaleidoscope of professional wrestling. In fact, Donald Trump was always Donald Trump. But between infotainment media being bastardized by Rupert Murdoch, lowering our standards for truth and discourse, then Vince McMahon's slow and brutal assault on our culture through bullying, bigotry, and cheating, a man like Donald Trump, and even those who support him, are the natural consequences of exploiting those aspects of the human condition. I've covered previously what the side effects could be. Now we have, just as Reagan is rising to power, these men are also preparing for their takeovers. Murdoch's would come in the mid-1980s, thanks to Reagan's loosening of restrictions and regulations, continued by his successor Bush 1 and then taken the rest of the way by Democrat Bill Clinton, and the influential Newt Gingrich in the 90s. McMahon's would come in 1982 when he took the reins of what is now World Wrestling Entertainment. Trump's would be a slower and more steady climb. But his takeover came in 1971 when he took over the Trump Organization. But 1980 was the year he secured the deal for Trump Tower. From there, history tells its tale, as I have in the previous episodes. We were dumbed down by sensationalized, for-profit, 24/7 infotainment, blurring the lines between feelings and fact, truth and tangent. We were numbed down by sports entertainment's stereotypical depictions of marginalized groups and the patriarchal, testosterone-blasted bully rhetoric in the mid-match promos. As the 80s began to turn the calendar page to the 90s, TV was getting more and more real, thanks in large part to professional wrestling's cultural impact. As the seeds for wrestling's Attitude Era were planted, sitcoms, which had always been filled with jabs, barbs, and sarcastic one-liners aimed at someone, now seemed wholly written around making fun of others, victimizing someone, and just being very, very mean to one another. All the time. Then, TV shows stopped centering around the hero or good guy. By the late 90s, that Attitude Era had America tuning in to the anti-hero, or even the bad guy as the role model. They were more fun to watch. It isn't that bad, really. Wrestling had been doing that for most of the last decade. Hulk Hogan wasn't the first, he was just the biggest. And his values were tied to a lot of things: religion, patriotism, integrity. Then he lied about steroids on Arsenio, dyed his beard black. Then cable television opened us up to more and more and more than the internet and streaming. We never had to unplug. We never had a chance. What three figures since 1980 have blurred the lines of reality more than Rupert Murdoch, Vince McMahon, and Donald Trump? Tearing down that fourth wall, insisting that what they're offering as entertainment is 100% real, and demonizing others, bullying, and being just mean. And of course, lying, stealing, and cheating. 7 Deadly Sins checklist? These 3 are 7 for 7. 10 Commandments for breaking them? 10 for 10. Give me a DSM-3 or either Umberto Eco's or Dr. Lawrence Britt's 14 Characteristics of Fascism. They're acing it. They were allowed to rise to the level of wealth, power, and influence largely because of the policies of conservatives. It doesn't stop there. Murdoch owns Fox News. He's just here, hanging over this like some crusty old rain cloud. But Trump appeared on McMahon's WWE promotion in the past, and Vince's wife Linda served in the Trump cabinet and even runs the America First Action Super PAC. Snakes of a slither coiled together, I reckon. I'm honestly just scratching the surface. There's a lot to discuss here, but I'm keeping it simple because this is just catching us up. The real terror isn't what this country did to our society and our culture as a whole, but what this did to set us up to be exploited, manipulated, and brainwashed. With great power comes great responsibility. There are many examples in our past of our forefathers and crafters of our society as we know it, recognizing that and setting policies in place to keep that in mind. Regulations, restrictions. It's like giving your kid a new car, but it's got a speed cap at 80 miles per hour. 10 above most interstates, enough to pass if needed. Otherwise, sit your ass in the slow lane, you know? Learn some patience behind the wheel. Instead, conservatives in America sought to regulate the natural freedoms and liberties of Americans while allowing business and corporations the free reign of the legislative buffet table. America, growing into its own as a nation in the 20th century, had struggled to really present as anything but a nation of savages, bullying and victimizing human beings. Imagine what we would think of a nation who treated other human beings the way we have. How would we feel about that country? Well, Antifa stormed Normandy over it, just so you know. Look, if you were a young, up-and-coming Adolf Hitler and you had a chip on your shoulder against a group of people, then maybe you'd take some notes, right? He did. He learned many of the strategies he imposed to eradicate people in Europe from America's treatment of our own people. We were the country that was supposed to set the standard. Think about that. This land was one of the last unconquered lands of untapped resources. Everyone wanted to claim America, but our history went down the way it did. We took these shores through inhumanity and cruelty. We cannot rationalize any other narrative. I've heard far too many, if anybody busts into my house, by God, I'm gonna rants to know for a fact that if the script was flipped, we would fight tooth and nail against people who were coming into our land. For all of God's sakes, just listen to how people talk about immigrants, refugees, and anyone who ain't from around here. There simply isn't a narrative that upholds the first settlers as anything but intruders who didn't take being intruders very well. That's almost everywhere Northern European Caucasian colonialism has landed, by the way. But America was the new experiment. Most everywhere else had been countries or territories for a long time. What new chunks of land weren't already inhabited, occupied, or claimed? It's like the Lakers, Celtics, Knicks, and Bulls were just there and had been forever. America was more like when the Seattle Sonics turned into the Oklahoma City Thunder. Same team, different name, different place, but same old numbers hanging in the rafters. For America, it was the same old tale of British imperialism, colonialism. We were the colonies. And even if we fought a war to be more, we sold our souls the moment we didn't make our country about ending slavery. I've said it before. Even with a greed-based capitalist economy, we could have chosen ways to innovate rather than exploit humans. We were supposed to be better, after all. Now imagine the chip on everyone else's shoulders who looks at us, sees how we've royally raw-dogged our opportunity here, and thinks they could have and should have done it better. No, it's not rhetorical. I mean it. Really think about that. Who would resent us for blowing it? Who would have a vested interest in us going belly up? Which countries or their leaders, silent or public-facing, would benefit from a, let's call it a repossession of America? Look around at this as an experiment, a test of what might have been possible had we not sold our souls. But rather than choosing the paths that were best for us, we chose Caligulaistic overbloated indulgence. We chose the complete polar opposite path as the ones dictated by most spiritualities. I sure as hell did. That annoyance at your phone, you aren't seeking any oneness there. That desire for a new phone? Materialism ain't the path, folks. We've compromised our core values for the sake of wanting things we can't afford, convinced we can't live without them thanks to the hours we spend binging those ideas over and over on the devices they need us to keep buying so we can binge more of those ideas over and over and over. And even if we elect out of the advertising messages, they'll just put the message in the background of the ideas we're binging over and over and over for hours on end on the devices we desperately need to upgrade on a monthly installment contract plan, which isn't really a contract because we don't do contracts anymore, but you just pay for a $1,000 idea binging device over how long? Nobody cares. We just need a new idea binging device because this one doesn't fold or have 6 cameras. We work hard. We deserve nice things. That's the lie we've been told. The lie is we have to work hard. And most never consider, especially today, that finding another path outside of traditional clock in, clock out weekly salary employment is one of the riskiest leaps to take. There's a comfort in falling in line. We aren't a republic. We aren't a democracy. We aren't Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, or progressives. We are capitalists. We've chosen that path over and over again. Profit before anything else. Greed is our God. Before anything else, any other value, there is almost always an economic concern at the top. I'm not advocating for abnegation or making a case for monkism or martyrdom. I'm saying that we've sworn our souls over to the corrupt capitalism cult where cash is king and money talks, and we don't even care. Show me an aspect of our society that is exempt from this corruption of financial influence. While we fought brother to brother, brother against brother, voter against voter, American against American, Republicans and Democrats, and then conservatives, moderates, and progressives within both of those, they've been fighting a separate, parallel battle. Think of it like mythological Greece. We're the mortals looking up at Mount Olympus, and the gods are fighting amongst themselves for power, and that makes us have less faith in the gods, because if the gods can't get their shit together, how do we expect them to lead us? So Aphrodite tosses us some sex scandals, Athena and Ares spit out a war or two with some social turmoil, Artemis threatens to take people's bows away and tax the hell out of arrows, Apollo was tricking fools into believing the words of false prophets, Demeter kills some crops, Hermes hands down the mad cow, Poseidon pollutes the seas, and then a little Dionysus influence with a hint of Hades to run for leader of the mortals. Our government has been corrupt for a very long time and unable to get their shit together at the expense of we the people, for the sake of power grabbing, infighting, and influence peddling. We, the people, lose. And to keep us from feeling like we lose, we're tossed a lot of distractions that never seem to ever get resolved, but we fight over them incessantly. Now in the modern era, we the people aren't taking the loss quietly anymore. We're speaking out. And it's never been easier to speak out publicly than today. Social media platforms have offered the traditionally marginalized, silent minority the platform people like me have always been privileged to have. I was a broadcaster at 19 years old. I was into journalism and media early. I sold my anonymity before I knew its price. For me, none of this is new. But for many, the opportunity to create content on any level is a life-changing experience. Being able to be heard, followed, supported, validated for millions is a feeling Americans desperately needed, especially now. But again, rather than seeing that on the horizon and that being offered to us as a service we should just have, that opportunity, technology, and platform was sold to corporate America and foreign entities with strings attached and hidden fees. Social media platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and more offer users the ability to go live and basically have their own TV show. I've covered many of the pros and cons in previous episodes, but for this, I'm saying that TikTok, specifically at the center of this controversy, is the prime focus of this conversation, though it can apply to all platforms. Plain and simple. For the benefits of so many finally having a voice, those voices are further diluted by the masses of voices, then mangled with unmoderated misinformation, while we spend hours on camera detailing every single crack in our system that any enemy listening would need to know. The teenager talks about her favorite uncle serving his country bravely on a ship somewhere like China or something. And then it's click, click, click to find out all we need to know about Uncle Mike. An angry voter grinds on about the detailed research they've done into how our elections work and the flaws they've found in our system. And American versus American shouts at each other ad nauseum, like a WrestleMania promo, until the live gets shut down through mass reporting. We're leaking sensitive information, whether we want to admit that or not. We are the new reality television, and it's incredibly boring to a lot of people, but it's important to many. They're watching our every move, waiting for us to reveal something. Wouldn't we do that if the tables were turned? If you think that sounds crazy, imagine how crazy it is to be so naive that that doesn't even cross your mind. Imagine being so crazy that when presented fact after fact, one justifies and dismisses the ethically questionable or otherwise unappealing actions. Call me crazy, but my trauma trained me for a lifetime of preparing for the absolute worst, expecting the unexpected, waiting for the shoe to fall, and overthinking everything. The Russia hoax. Propaganda ripped right out of the playbook. Not the facts about Russia's meddling in our governmental affairs, the fact that it's being branded the Russia hoax by slacks-aflame narcissists who dictate the narrative. It's being belittled and mocked through media gaslighting in a way that has made it so that anyone who talks about it instantly sounds crazy or is immediately discredited by both sides. Conservatives refuse to hear anything about it because they've been told none of it is true, and they lack the skills to prove that for themselves. So they dunning all their Krugers and say all the things they've heard someone else say so many times, they actually believe it themselves. Lefties hear it and are hesitant to accept it because those who are educated or intelligent enough to understand the ramifications of what I'm about to lay out for you, it's terrifying to believe how close America truly is to falling and how Americans are so close to becoming refugees in our own backyard. First, America's meddling in foreign affairs is nothing worth debating. It just is. We all know it just is. We've dethroned leaders for despots because they suited our agendas till we've had them bumped off and replaced with a compromise. We've invaded, or not, when it suited us and not until it did. This is America's history of colonization and fighting like hell to even be a country when the rest of the world had been around for centuries. All for profit. We were the new kid in town, struggling to keep things together. But we did, and we outgrew them all for profit. But all along the way, we've been playing Risk, Monopoly, but not a lot of sorry. We, the people, are bored of the games, and we want our voices heard. What I'm about to tell you is why that's never going to happen. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. This is a tale that isn't easy to weave or spin, that touches almost every part of everything we know, and most of what we don't. It's bigger than any one single thing I have and will discuss, and many of the things will be sort of vague, blanket terms because of the broad scope of what they cover. Like the mafia. It's bigger than that, but certainly revolves around it. What does that even mean, the mafia? Which mafia? Let's go with the plural. Several at play here, but we're going to centralize our focus on simply the subject of organized crime and corruption. Even the racial or geographical mafia organizations we know through media, Italian, Chinese, Russian, etc., aren't really one hierarchy, but rather a series of organizations, oligarchs, billionaires, political leaders, businesses, and names you've never heard of. If one wanted to assume a big bad boogeyman or a new world order or Illuminati, then the mafia is the number one contender. Even the church bows to the mafia, business bows to the mafia, governments bow to the mafia. We're all playing rock, paper, scissors, and the mafia owns the rocks, papers, scissors, and the hands that form them, and the arena in which they... whatever you call that. If we know and accept that the mafia has had its hand in so many key events in our country alone, and we accept that organized crime mafias around the world have done the same with countries that aren't America, and we also recognize that America has meddled around the world, so it only makes sense that others would try to meddle with us. And we recognize that America is a melting pot for all and the land of opportunity for all, and all opportunities means all, even salacious ones like organized crime, corruption, drugs, human trafficking, and whatnot. Then that is on the table. So when we say lay it on the table, this is it. The mafia is on the table. So everything we're putting on this table is and will be affected, infected, influenced by, and connected to this unknown phantom phrase, the mafia. Also through the lens of our interference through the world, what retribution might come from it, and who might plan that retribution. The mafia. Organized crime and corruption for a centralized goal. The NRA is very much involved in all this as any foreign power. I'll cover that more in a future episode. Just to say that their blood money, money from Russia, among other foreign interests, is what fuels this engine. ALEC and other conservative organizations like it have pushed forth the narratives and agendas, the bullet points, that have dictated the rhetorical talking points and opinions of millions of Americans since the back half of the 20th century. This is a tale of greed, corruption, and power, all for profit. Now, it isn't that simple. The decimation of the working class, the choice to make America dumb again for profit, when we could have pursued greatness no other nation had ever known, is something most don't consider enough. With the power of our cultural influence, media prowess, and technological innovation, America could have united this entire planet, but chose for a very small number of mostly white men, wealthy beyond imagination, to rule silently. This is a story of conquest, imperialism, and meddling in the affairs of others, but it isn't quite that simple. This goes beyond your Southern history book colonialism. This is conquest with intent to not only control, but at times eradicate. This is, I wonder what is here, rather than I wonder who is here. What is here we can take. Who is here will keep us from taking what is here. That's Caucasian colonialism. And one might argue, human nature. It sure does seem like Caucasian colonialism is the worst aspects of human nature devolved into a narcissistically, sociopathic, festering, rabid, dehumanizing abuse and ownership cult, doesn't it? Historically speaking, of course. With America's faith in democracy rattled time and time again, with assassinations, Nixon and Watergate, the Democrats versus Carter, Reagan versus Iran, colluding to release the hostages if he'd won, and with Iran-Contra, Oliver North with Clinton, with Bush and Gore, and Florida's hanging chads. What America needed now was a good old-fashioned war and a catalyst for racial division. Again, America's attention in the 80s and 90s as far as the word terrorism was concerned was skewing away from the stereotypical Middle Eastern imagery Reagan conspired with, but more to, even Sergeant Slaughter went rogue. Rather than the images of what Reagan committed treason to save the hostages from, America's stereotype by the late 80s and early 90s for terrorism was more like religious cults and mountain man survivalist wooded communes. Those reclusive gun nuts, that lone wolf antisocial outsider. Aside from the war on drugs and crime and punishment mentality of white supremacy, the idea of dangers to society in those days was certainly the white loser loner. Or the white loser loner with charisma who had a cult. The NRA's efforts, combined with the influence of Gingrich's obstructionism, and his organization, the Conservative Opportunity Society, along with ALEC and many others, had pushed for the kind of atmosphere with guns, firearms, and the gun culture we see in America today, neglecting the volatile powder keg of rampant, untreated mental illness in a cowboy state. What happened was, within a decade of the NRA's focus shifting from gun safety education and promoting gun control legislation toward the promotion of actual guns and the influence of legislation to loosen the gun laws that had just been implemented, radical right-wing extremism was allowed to rise and grow their arsenals. Dangerous, radicalized terrorist organizations hiding behind religion or patriotism started popping up all over in response to the propaganda surrounding firearms in America. What happened was, ALEC formed the year of the Roe v. Wade decision, which wasn't coincidental. Abortion as an issue had been in America's activism narrative for some time. Within a decade of ALEC forming, Gingrich formed his group, and the pro-gun, anti-abortion, pro-life, misogynistic, white supremacist policy and direction for Republicans was set. What happened was Waco, Ruby Ridge, the Montana Freeman, the bombings in Oklahoma City and at Olympic Park in Atlanta, anti-abortion attacks, white supremacist groups, radicalized gun advocates. America was seeing the white in red, white, and blue more prominently and understanding that the danger to us was lurking in the truck parked next to us more than anywhere else. Then 9/11 happened. America went full throttle, doubled down on racism, and that was kind of the final moral compromise needed. With that, America would prove we hadn't changed after all. With that, America would prove we never atoned for our original sin. With those white woman tears, America would fall. The checkmate that would come would be Sarah Palin, the nail in the coffin for the final anti-Russia conservative in the GOP, the former POW and respected maverick John McCain. With McCain's presidency, one could almost expect a resurrection of Eisenhower, with hopefully less homophobia. The Cold War was about America's enemies trying desperately to find a weakness to exploit through espionage and James Bond spy games. With America's attitude era of pro-patriotism, anti-commie rhetoric infiltrating us would be difficult. Reagan was turning people over to the feds as being commies, remember? With McCain, America would be thrust back to typical middle-of-the-road sensible conservatism with a president who wasn't afraid to compromise with liberals to keep the civil balance. Republicans hated that. For those who weren't Americans, centrism doesn't work to their benefit. The Clinton scandal shook us at our political and ideological core. Look, Clinton wasn't a Boy Scout, and his policies aren't reflective of the history spun. But while many Republicans opposed Clintonian politics, they benefited immeasurably from the ripple effects of his presidency. But for the American people, the audience, we saw America's political spectrum in a way like never before. The real world had been a thing for most of the decade, and news, information, entertainment had Voltron to become this infotainment media. Political stump speeches had come to reflect more the mid-match promos of a wrestling event than intellectual discourse, policy, and ideas. America was in the reality era, just in time for the most personable, likable, and cool president we'd had in... Well, hell, since when? Carter was likable but not cool. The rest were Republicans or Lyndon Johnson. Look, Clinton was a different cat altogether. America went full-on cult of personality with Reagan, and then they got hit with Bush 1. America needed Hollywood, baby! So Clinton, Bush 2, because it was just 8 years between Dad losing and the son winning the presidency. Keep going. Again, just one president between the father who was vice president under the previous 8 years, then his son who would serve 8 years thanks to his brother, the governor of the state that decided the 2000 election we're no longer allowed to talk about. America had lowered their standards to excuse the enigmatic Slick Willie. Whatever faith America had in its leadership after Clinton was surely incinerated after the disastrous W run. It was hard to hold our head up high as America with Bush at the podium. Republicans turned to John McCain to restore honor to the party. Then Sarah Palin happened. Nobody thinks that was a great idea. Few thought it would be even then. Certainly history has shown she lost him the job. But what happened? Hillary Clinton was seeking her husband's old job that he legally couldn't hold again. Just 2 elections later, 8 years. One president between the wife wanting the husband's old job. Look, I'm sorry, I didn't even like Dynasty when it was on TV. But then this dark horse upstart senator from the heartland of America. Well, Hawaii, then Illinois, and Chicago at that, but just go with it. This dark horse upstart senator from the heartland of America swept in and, well, he absolutely flopped like a fish out of water. Barack Obama was not good on the national stage at first. No, he was young, green, very unknown. Spoilers. It would be the dark in that dark horse that would be the thing many Americans wouldn't be able to move past, but I think we already knew that, didn't we? The more Clinton came at Obama, the better he got. He learned, he evolved. He rolled with the punches, and eventually Barack Obama was gaining support. He grew more confident and surer of himself and his message. People were listening. What happened in the 2008 election was a lot to explain, but for the purposes of this huge controversy, who picked Sarah Palin to sink McCain's campaign? Who bled the McCain campaign dry at the end? Who started the information assault on Hillary Clinton? Who started birtherism? McCain's campaign suffered from funding towards the end, which might have given Obama the edge. If that was deliberate, part of the plan, that's certainly a path to follow. However, who picked Sarah Palin is a tricky question to answer because absolutely no one will fall on that sword historically. It's also more likely the nail in McCain's poorly punned coffin. It's a shared responsibility among members of McCain's staff and GOP advisors, but John McCain ultimately shoulders the burden. It was his campaign. He did have final say. I'm certain there was influence or maybe even pressure. However, one thing all parties agree, it seems, is that the final say was the guy who is now dead and can't defend himself. I'm kidding. John McCain totally took the blame when he was alive, because John McCain was John McCain, and that's the man he was, the last Republican to accept responsibility. So the common knowledge is that Palin wasn't presented as the option, but was in a mix of names as potential running mates. Nobody takes the blame for saying, hey, what do we think about Sarah Palin? Nor does anyone take the blame for saying, that's a fantastic idea. Nor does anyone take the blame for not saying, are you kidding me? But why wouldn't she stand out as a young, attractive female governor of one of America's biggest states, albeit less populated, but populated with the only real thing Republicans seem to care about, oil? If no one really put her name out there and she hadn't really accomplished anything at all to get a headline, why would anybody think anything about her at all? It's not like she was impressive when you met her. I'm being mean. I'll cut to the spoilers. World War III will be digital, social, and informational. It'll be a data war. EMPs will knock out our power grids, and without Wi-Fi, most of our TikTok-addicted society would go infinitely mad. Imagine COVID, but without the internet. But Americans have always been resilient. Surely we could survive if somebody forgot to pay the power and the internet bill, right? In the months leading up to the decision on vice president for the 2008 election, many names were floated around for both parties. American politics, especially by that time, was American political idol. Veeps weren't much different in that process. There seems to be a formula of the least harmful option mixed with whose turn it is, mixed with some balancing of the ticket element. For Democrats, they look to conservative Senator from Delaware, Joe Biden. For Obama's youth and eloquent oratory skills, stumbling, bumbling Joe's snarky sidekick, weird grandpa vibe made for good memes. Joe didn't translate to a whole lot of votes or any impactful influence against obstructionist Republicans or even progressives within his own party. Leftists could see Biden's record as being as close to Republican as one could get without smelling like an outhouse, while Republicans didn't like him because he was a Democrat and was running with the black kid. I know. But it always comes down to white supremacy. It was Joe's turn. Joe was appealing to middle-of-the-roaders. Biden and McCain weren't far off. For many moderates, it's a wash. Then it's just Palin versus Obama. Vice presidential candidates don't usually matter, but in 2008, she sure did. Joe had a heartstring-tugging story most of America would pour into a dog bowl and lap up on all fours. Joe was the conservative balance to Obama's perceived progressivism. So, how did Hillary Clinton tank in 2008? How did Biden become a household name? How did Palin get enough clout to make the Veep list? It was the news cycle, the media, but mostly online. It was stories of Palin being pushed out to people who would be most likely to be vocal about supporting her. It was skewed headlines and favorable propaganda stories through sites that presented as normal news, but were in fact just alt-right blog sites, located where? Written by whom? Same thing we see today, a decade and a half later, still not fixed. Figuring out who was pushing the Sarah Palin narrative online is the answer, because that's in all certainty how she became in that mix of names for McCain's running mate. That's also likely who was pushing the Hillary Clinton propaganda, true or false. The fact is, the Clintons are problematic in so many ways, but this election cycle in 2008 was just the beginning of the Democrats' problems where Hillary's online footprint was concerned. And it really isn't like the Clintons are any more corrupt than any Republican. It's that true leftists urge for clean candidates because they're out there. They just aren't as shiny all the time. Hillary should have been the candidate in 2008. Regardless if Hillary Clinton was the candidate against John McCain and Sarah Palin, I think McCain might win. Some of those on-the-fence feminist-leaning conservatives might have felt good about their vote for a woman on the ticket without having to vote for Hillary. It's not what they needed for America. These foreign entities set out to destroy us. Not now, no. America could handle a female president or vice president, even if Hillary herself was too hard to swallow. Americans agreed by a majority that they weren't overwhelmingly sexist so as not to vote for a woman, just not her, or her, whichever, in 2008. Especially when they have this dashing young black man that can make them feel good about their woke little selves. The sexism and misogyny weren't the trigger that would light the fuse and blow America to smithereens. No. America was already tearing itself apart over the very idea that America might elect a black president, or that people in America would be that mad over electing a black president. With Obama, they had the perfect test subject. The man, aside from a funny name, had all the qualifications and credentials. His resume, still impressive for a man his age, but they needed a catalyst to see just how vile America would be, to expose us. Birtherism is another story altogether. I've discussed it a little bit before in the season. My argument is that the racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic implications are simply what they are. White supremacist dog whistles at best, quiet part out loud at second best, don't tread on me January 6th at worst. It's the treasonous implications. I grew up close to a top-secret government facility my grandfather retired from. Loose lips sink ships is a phrase that's been hammered into my head my entire life. You simply don't talk ill about our country publicly. That could bring shame or cause harm. Borderline nationalism, but that's my parents' and my grandparents' generation's influence. In the Second World War, that phrase meant spies could be anywhere. If you met someone at a pool hall, they could be assigned to you, and everything you say to your buddy while you're playing pool gets fed right back to Moscow. See Maria Butina, which I'm getting to later. We forgot that somewhere along the way. That paranoia didn't translate over with the patriotism into nationalism. Since the 2000 election, Americans have spoken out about how broken our elections are and how corrupt our system of democracy really is. For 15 years, our enemies have heard in detail exactly how our election process can be compromised by literally anyone. You see, nobody needed Obama to be a Manchurian candidate to destroy America. They just needed Obama to be the candidate so they could see how America would destroy America. America would take care of the rest, right? With Barack Obama's presidency forever called into illegitimacy by the illiterate and the twisted chip on the world's shoulders hanging the chads of 2000, the narrative was easily becoming, even if you win, it's a rigged system, or they're going to put up whoever they want, my vote doesn't matter. McCain would have been bad for those who oppose America. He was a war hawk and would have continued the pointless wars in the Middle East until the job was finished. It's just that the job never had a clear description or endgame. In this story, Palin was the patsy who sank the ship. McCain might have beaten Obama. My argument was McCain beat himself in that town hall, but someone needed Obama to be president. And he became America's first president of color because Americans related to his message of hope and change. He won the election because his message and policy were strong. I take nothing away from that. It's just that other entities needed it to happen for their own means, too. And thus, the most divisive president in history. The president who dared to be born black. And worse, be elected black. Over the course of those 8 years, the racism in America, our original sin, was festering and boiling over. Those dormant feelings and attitudes that had been pushed to the quiet part over decades after the Civil Rights Act were now out loud. What made things worse for everyone involved is that Obama wasn't a TV stereotype of, well, anything. What was there to mock, stereotype, denigrate? It almost drove them mad not being able to mock the man they had been so used to and conditioned to mocking others like. So they mocked his name, his tan suit, the one he was born with, and many other things that made them feel less like a blatant white supremacist. Many of those awash in that toxic white Southern culture were rattled to their cores because this man didn't act to their expectations. So they lowered their expectations and kept lowering them. But Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. Obama surpassed expectations and Republicans just couldn't handle it. He was well-dressed, eloquently articulate, a good husband, a good father, and ran, aside from the drones and the decimating of the working class with what he did to the Occupy movement, a scandal-free administration. In fact, his was the first in decades not to have many under him resigning or being brought up on charges. Don't worry, America would get back to its regularly scheduled programming soon enough. For 8 years, America was subject to a black president who made very small-minded, insecure people with very limited critical thinking skills feel lesser than. How? By not acting like he was better than everybody else. And that drove some Americans crazy. Not all, but we know. That and America was coming off a two-term predecessor whose example was an embarrassment and shame. A president who lowered the dignity of the office of president more than even Clinton before him. A president who made it seem like literally anybody could get the job. Democrats sought to restore some of that pride to the office with either Clinton or Obama. Both would have been better credentialed, educated, and professional than George W. Bush. Obama, for example, could be considered a cultural slap in the face to conservatives who felt proud of George W. Bush's record and relatability. For them, an equally relatable black man who wasn't a total inept buffoon might have been something to take personally. We've been insulting their intelligence for years, after all, or just pointing out how they've insulted their own intelligence for decades. It's no wonder they turned out the way they did in 2016. If we didn't like Bush and our response was Obama, well, we sure weren't going to like the next guy they'd elect. Oh, they'd show us. Own the libs, after all. For all it did, birtherism over those 8 years simply told our enemies literally anybody can get elected president in America, and it's not that hard to fool everybody. Look, a Kenyan-born Muslim did it. It didn't have to be true. It just needed to be. Then America would tear itself apart over it. 2016. Despite his advancements and accomplishments, Obama might have disappointed some progressives and may have halted progressivism with his response to the Occupy movement. A failure only in America's unreal expectations, his presidency was ending as a success. However, socially, we had been more divided than ever before. The American people chose a candidate resoundingly through social media. A candidate that made sense for we the people, the working class. A true labor candidate. His campaign would be foiled with interference from a Democratic establishment that once again is more interested in influence peddling and whose turn it is anyway than what's best or right for the American people. They knew better than we that conservative policy had grown like a cancer, and the Democrats could have allowed the party to swing America back to balance. Just like in '44, progressives got the shaft by the Democrats, and the repercussions were the Strom Thurmond states' rights racists rising up. In 1968, America turns its back on progressives and loses to Nixon. History repeats. 1972, it was too late. The Democrats were too disorganized and divided to fight back. 1976 was Democratic chaos. 1980 was worse and delivered the country to Reagan. History repeats. So here we are again with 2016, another misinformation campaign, this time much better executed. For all your instincts to, but this, but that, understand that you sound as silly as I do denying that there is this huge corruption thing as I sound saying there is. The difference is your desire for warm public toilet seat oblivion doesn't change the facts. The misinformation campaign against Hillary Clinton was crucial to her losing to Donald Trump in 2016. The anti-socialist attacks against Bernie Sanders, the misinformation of the Bernie Bro movement, much of the rhetoric, and many other factors have been proven to have been pushed by foreign powers to influence that election. That election, candidates didn't need the laundered Russian NRA campaign donations so much as they needed the digital assist. Those donations came on Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere propaganda could be fine-tuned, targeted. Those donations aren't traceable, trackable, or even measurable because we don't. They aren't financial. They're strategies and tactics used to brainwash, gaslight, or otherwise influence the thinking, ideas, and sway of the American people. Foreign powers are influencing our ideas, which influence our elections. They don't have to hack us anymore. They already have. True, Clinton's tactical errors in underestimating her opponent, as well as her being the candidate in the first place, were all factors. She won the popular vote. She should have won by a mandate. She was exponentially more qualified and dignified to be president. My argument then, as I defend that in hindsight, literally anybody could have beaten Donald Trump. But the Democrats were too interested in playing the same political games within their own party, then gaslighting the American people against the progressives in the party once again, blaming them for her loss. In fact, no one is to blame except those who voted for Donald Trump or didn't vote at all. So, who voted for Donald Trump? And why? Goldwater, Nixon, Reagan, Alec, the NRA, Gingrich. They all spent their respective existences voting for this inevitability, but moreover, their influence on today's conservative ideology dates back to the early 20th century and all those generations of assimilating into what we see today. Alt-right white nationalism, American fascism. The brash style and bully mentality of those men with their Bulwerian approach, take it or leave it, on legislating, negotiating, and coexisting. In fact, more accurately, their decimate and eradicate the opposition philosophy. The corruption of financial influence on corporations and partisan organizations in our political process. With the deregulation of business throughout the mid to late 20th century. The unwinding of gun control legislation. The deregulation on children's programming and the media ownership, and the internet, and legislation like Citizens United, which grants limitless power to those corporations and organizations within our political system, America has been primed for the taking. While we, the people, have been fighting over race issues, abortion, guns, debt ceilings, student loans, and a GoFundMe healthcare system, our enemies are watching us, learning what makes us tick. Learning how to control us to their will, learning how to make us turn on each other and turn on our own country. Coming up in part B of this two-part, one-part finale, it's a conspiracy. It's not supposed to add up. It's an open bar of Molotov cocktails and we're getting hammered by white Russians. I'm going to lay out the conspiracy I've been leading up to. Sure, look, America hasn't done ourselves any favors here, but the real test of our patriotic fortitude wouldn't be one of battlegrounds, tanks, and ticker-tape parades celebrating the downing of another despot. No. Our patriotism was being tested in other ways. America's a plastic, superficial society and the world knows it. We're McDonald's, Walmart, Facebook, and AI-generated headlines, all for profit. We'll lie about anything just to look like we aren't the problem. The world sees the way we treat others, our own people, how we hold humans hostage over healthcare, education, forcing our people into a debt we'll never crawl out of. America is online, and our indiscretions and debauchery are on display for the world to see. America elected a C-student bad actor who turned on his fellow Americans and turned traitor to win, pushing this country much closer to fascism than we were before. What's worse is that America elected Trump and still didn't learn from electing Ronald Reagan, the last C-student bad actor who turned on his fellow Americans and turned traitor to win and pushed us toward fascism. America isn't the nation that's going to lead the world anymore. The world is just waiting for us to figure that out and get out of the way. By the time we figure that out, of course, it will be too late. It might already be. Since the New World Order of ethical ambiguity up to this episode, I've broken down in detail how American society, we the people, have been slowly and meticulously brainwashed over decades, dumbed down and numbed down, with those who have nudged that along in the digital age, watching with their popped corn like Michael Jackson in the Thriller video gif, just waiting for the right time to strike, waiting for America to stumble enough to fall. But who will catch us? Who will be there to lift us up when we fall? The world will not let America just annihilate ourselves. There's too much here. The authoritarian fascist regimes across this globe are circling this country like vultures, waiting to pick whatever meat we, the people, leave on these bones when we're done ravaging ourselves. A tale of espionage, spy games, and influencing America's legislation, pushing a multi-pronged agenda to end this country once and for all. The digital age brings about the digital art of war, where we will see artificial intelligence as an enemy and an ally, and maybe the only thing to come out on top once it's all said and done. A world without America looks mighty different than this one, folks. Good or bad, it's in all our best interests that we keep this thing going. What I'm about to tell you is a warning that we didn't heed early enough. But for those who still don't get it, listen carefully to my next episode, where I'm presenting the conspiracy of all conspiracies that will rattle you to your core. Or you'll just do what we've done the last few decades and pretend it isn't real, excusing it all away for our warm public toilet-seated blissful oblivion. My guess is that you won't be able to unhear it or go back to that oblivion once I'm finished deconstructing a culture of cultism. Thanks for joining me. My book, Overthinking Everything About You, is available on Amazon. It's a compassion and critical thinking workbook. Get it as a gift or get it for yourself if you need it. You can link to it through joshbrandonmedia.com. Check out my other videos on YouTube too. You'll find all my TikToks, my original music, all of Overthinking Everything, clips of my acting and voiceover work. It's all organized in playlists for you. Check out my merch store. Get your Trigger tees in the Sir Talks-A-Lot Swags-A-Lot store. I got bumper stickers and more products coming soon. Follow me on TikTok and everywhere online. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Do all the things I need you to do and help me grow. You grow with me. We grow together. If you like this series, consider a donation to Cash App. And look, don't forget to sign up for my email list. More stuff coming up soon. I'm Josh Brandon. I'm overthinking everything.